Hello, friends, and welcome to the 22nd episode of In the Know, your 25-minute deep dive into all things employee experience. I'm JD, the Chief Learning Architect at Exonify, and today's show is all about disruption. And I know what you're thinking. We've all been disrupted way more than enough over the past couple of years, but that's actually why I'm so excited for today's conversation, because today we're going to figure out how can we take control of disruption and shift it from something to fear to a force that we can leverage to make ourselves and our organizations better. That's right. We're disrupting disruption on today's show. And there's only one person who can help us do it. Shawn Kanungo, innovation strategist and author of the new book, The Bold Ones, is here to show us why the key to getting ahead in today's workplace may actually be trying to get yourself fired. And because you're already being bold, you're hanging out with us here today in the middle of a workday, we want to give you a chance to potentially grab a copy of Shawn's new book. So if you're watching live on LinkedIn right now, we want you to drop the keyword gratitude into the LinkedIn chat anytime during today's show for your chance to get a copy of The Bold Ones. But before we welcome Shawn, it's time for some ITK kudos. First off, kudos once again to John Hinchliffe, Senior Learning Consultant at Jampan. John was recently awarded with the Colin Corder Award for Outstanding Contribution to Learning at the LPI Awards in the UK. To quote the event host, John is a man of passion and integrity, a man for whom learning is not a job but a calling, a man whose authority and credibility have made him one of the greatest influencers in our industry. He's also one of our favorite ITK guests, so kudos, John Hinchliffe. Kudos to the L&D team at Dollar General. DG was recognized at the 2023 Training Conference for their outstanding training initiative in 2022. DG is already a heralded member of the Training Magazine Hall of Fame, but clearly that doesn't mean they're slowing down anytime soon. So kudos, Dollar General. Kudos to everyone who attended my sessions at the recent ATD Tech Knowledge and training conferences. After 3 years of nonstop talking to people in little boxes, I'm still getting my in-person speaking muscles back into shape. And your passion and energy mean a lot. So kudos to everyone that I've met in person recently. Kudos to everyone working on the front lines of grocery. February 22nd was Supermarket Employee Day. And we all know how hard these folks work and the critical role that they play in supporting our communities. So if you missed the formal date last week, be sure to say thank you to your local grocery associates and wish them a belated Happy Supermarket Employee Day. And finally, kudos to the crew of Southwest Flight 1633. Now, my recent trip to speak in New Orleans was my first plane ride in over 3 years. And I've flown a lot over the course of my career, but I was still, a bit nervous to get back into it. And if you want to know how it went, well, the flight back to Orlando was the most memorable I've ever had. Long story short, I was maybe one of 6 people on that plane that was not involved in high school cheerleading. And it was Riley's 16th birthday. Who's Riley? I still don't know. But what did the flight attendants do? They decorated the plane. They played games with all the kids. They played music over the PA. They even read messages from Riley's family members. I'd never been on a party bus before, yet alone one flying 37,000 feet in the air. So kudos to the Southwest crew and happy birthday, Riley. And those are your ITK kudos of the week. Now it's time to welcome our special ITK guest, Shawn Kanungo. Shawn is a globally recognized innovation strategist and best-selling author. He previously spent 12 years with Deloitte, working closely with leaders to better plan for the opportunities associated with disruptive innovation. Today, Shawn is a partner with Queen and Rook, where he advises leading organizations and executives on disruptive trends. And I actually first worked with Shawn a couple years ago when we co-hosted the online edition of Exonicom Live, Exonify's annual community event back in 2020. Because, of course, everything back then was online. So Shawn and I couldn't even be in the same room hosting the event. And in fact, we weren't even in the same country. So Shawn hosted his portion of the event from an empty theater in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, while I did my part from the empty Walt Disney Theater here in Orlando, Florida. But speaking to empty audiences isn't the only thing that we have in common. We both have effervescent personalities. We both have amazing hairstyles. We both just published new books at the end of last year. So The Bold Ones right here offers a playbook for individuals to become bolder, to push their careers and companies forward. Shawn Kanungo, you're in the know.
Well, JD, I'm so excited to be here. You look great, by the way. Your hair, your glasses, it looks unbelievable. And I'm just so excited to be back and chatting with you. You're a pro. I love this.
I definitely stepped up the game. I'm not kidding everyone out there when I say I got a haircut and new glasses for this episode because Shawn brings the style every time. But again, congrats, Shawn, on the book. Engaging, fun, most energetic business book I've ever read. And I want to dive right in to what I think is the most attention grabbing and frankly, potentially nerve wracking recommendation that you make in the book. And that is try to get yourself fired. So what do you mean by that in the context of, leveraging the forces of disruption to move yourself forward?
Absolutely. Try to get yourself fired is probably one of the most controversial parts of the book. And it doesn't mean what you think. Okay. I don't want anybody to punch anybody in the face. To me, the idea of trying to get yourself fired is actually how do you go off and take a very small risk that will change your trajectory within an organization and even the organization itself. And the way that I came up with this concept is actually, it's just a personal framework of mine. Every time I've been doing this for a decade, every time I would go up the elevator to work or step into work, I would ask myself this question, which is how do I try to get myself fired? Which is how do I take a very small risk that will push myself forward? And the part of the reason why I started doing this is because I was nervous innovating. I was nervous of trying to be bold. And by taking a very small step every single day, what it allowed me to do is change my internal narrative of being an innovator. And then what I realized is that as I became more comfortable taking risks, actually the people around me recognized that I was taking risks and saw me as an innovator. So not only did I change my internal dialogue, but I saw people around me now point to me and say, he's the innovation guy. So it literally changed my life and my career.
I can relate to that in the fact that I've never mentally said to myself, try to get yourself fired per se, because I prefer not to. But I have talked a lot about fixing small problems in order to change the way people think about you. And it's kind of the way it doesn't necessarily sound like the most innovative concept, but I've often found that when I'm trying to get out of a box, I vogue a lot on camera nowadays when I do this, but in a lot of cases, people put you in a box by your role or the work you've done in the past. And I often suggest to people, well, can you address a small problem or go after this kind of small issue that's outside of that box? And if you really solve that problem, really help someone do their job more effectively, they may start to look at you differently. So do you see a relationship between those two ideas?
Absolutely. I think at the end of the day, innovation is about solving problems. And what you described is the idea of, to me, innovation, which is you're solving a very small problem that's outside of your comfort zone. And by solving problems outside of your comfort zone, you're actually not only developing skills, you're developing knowledge, but ultimately what I believe that you're doing is you're developing this muscle for innovation. You're developing this muscle for boldness. And once you start doing that, the more challenging, the harder the problems get, the more that you're going to be able to accomplish. So I love that analogy that you have. And that's probably why, we think alike. That's why you dropped your amazing book, in December. So did I. And look at us. We're thinking alike.
Now, I'm going to ask the question that I think a lot of people watching us right now are going to ask. Is Shawn standing in front of a virtual backdrop, or is that a real space that you're in right now?
Yeah, no, this is real. Let me just run. This is real. We got our producer Mazen in the cut right there as well.
What up?
So this is real. This is real. We're in a theater, and part of the reason why we're doing this is because I know that you put a lot of effort into this. Your audio sounds amazing. You do a ton of prep. And I just wanted to come with the same energy and the same production level because I believe that when things look great aesthetically, that the message actually resonates a little bit more. So that's why I put a lot into delivering a really great session, whether it's a Q&A or a keynote.
So let's dig into that because you flipped the keynote industry on its head at the beginning of the pandemic when most people like me were kind of sitting down. I've been sitting in this chair talking. I've been a man in a box in this chair for the last 3 years. You did not do that. So while people were just trying to figure out how they could do any type of activity, deliver any type of presentations or keynote sessions, you took actions that turned you into a person who is now regarded as the world's best virtual keynote speaker. So can you walk us through that process of, as things start to change, how did you think through that challenge that then takes you to a space where you're now talking to me in a theater instead of sitting in front of a desk like I am?
Yeah. Well, listen, you look great sitting down, so don't, give yourself a little bit of credit. For me, when the pandemic hit, I remember I was in Asheville, North Carolina, on March 11th, 2020, and at that point the economy was crumbling. COVID was on the rise. People didn't know what was going to be happening, and I remember standing on stage and telling everybody that, listen, when things are bad, you have to double down on innovation. You have to double down on thinking differently. And when the pandemic hit, I'm going to be honest with you, to me, it was a home game, because when everything went digital, that's what I've been preaching for the last number of years, which is, how do you double down on innovation and digital? And my team at Bad Films and we've been creating video and trying to create compelling video content for years. And so I literally called up the guys at Bad Films, the production crew that I use, and I said, hey, have you guys ever done a live stream before? And they literally said no. And I said to them, this is in March 2020, I said, listen, neither have I, but I want to create the best damn live stream that people have ever seen. And so over that time, we iterated and we worked on it, and we're still experimenting to this day. And Matt, you're in the cut too. Actually, I should probably bring you on. And when I asked you guys, have you ever done a live stream? What was your reaction?
I was like, no. And then you said, well, great, because we have one coming up. And then I was like, okay, great. So then it took a solid week of just figuring out the basics. And then once you get the basics going, then you can actually iterate on the small little things as time goes on.
Yeah.
You just do it as you're learning, as you keep going.
Yeah, it's a level of experimentation. Every single day you come in and you're like, okay, let's try something new. Let's innovate. Let's bring in different guests. Let's drop in different cues. I mean, it's just a constant a game of iteration, and it's just been fun. To me, it was a home game. This is my court. Like I run this entire thing. So to me, it was a beautiful thing.
And now everyone watching is trying to think, how do I get out of my chair? Because I'd like to, raising your game helped give me a really unique opportunity, because as we showed in that video clip, I mean, the actual conversation I had when we were planning that event in 2020 was, well, Shawn's standing on a stage in a theater. If I'm sitting in my chair I gotta stand on a stage in a theater. Get me a theater. And what was really cool was, because again, the theater spaces weren't being used, it was much easier to get my hands on an empty theater space than it would be nowadays. I got to stand on stage at the Walt Disney Theater, which is the performing arts space in downtown Orlando, where I saw Hamilton and Wicked.
Yeah.
And noticeably, there were many fewer people in my audience. It was me and 2 camera people for 4 hours or so in that theater. But it was a really cool experience. So thank you so much for providing that to me by raising your game.
Hey, listen, absolutely. And the thing with the theater was that we knew that it was going to be empty. No one was going to be using it. And we actually were able to keep their people busy and fed. And it was a great business for them, because we were there every day and shooting. So it became great. And I'm glad that I was able to get you back to Disney, because that's where you started your career.
There you go. There you go. So again, a great example of leveraging disruption to create real world opportunity. If that's something that you as a viewer out there are interested in, you're watching live on LinkedIn right now, be sure to drop the keyword gratitude in the chat. You might be able to get a copy of Shawn's book, The Bold Ones. We might send that to you after today's show. So Shawn, I do want to dig into another one in the book. I've got a bunch of notes as I was reading The Bold Ones. Another one that stood out to me after Try to Get Yourself Fired, that feels like a bit of contradictory thinking, especially for someone in the learning and development space, is when you said there are no best practices. Because I can tell you, in L&D, we love our best practices. So what did you mean by that?
Yeah, I have spent my entire career trying to find best practices. I spent my entire career in management consulting. I spent 12 years at Deloitte. Before that, I was working for a newspaper company where my whole job was to find best practices. And to be honest with you, within a particular industry, once something becomes a best practice and other organizations adopt it, it's no longer a best practice. To me, it becomes the practice. It becomes the standard practice. And what I realized working in management consulting is that we would just take what people will call the best practices from other organizations, and then we would implement them. They just became the status quo. That just became what everybody does. To me, that's not the best practice. And to me, there are still best practices. Don't get me wrong. There are still best practices, but those best practices exist outside of your industry. So if you want to find the best practices, you have to go outside of your organization, outside of your industry, and see what others are doing in their particular spaces, and take their best practices and implement into that into what you are doing. So I believe that's how you go about it. And I feel like many people think about this business world as chess, like it's a finite game, but it's not. Chess is a finite game, and you have best practices in chess. But in business and L&D, the game is constantly changing. In your book, The Modern Learning Ecosystem, you talk about the idea that the fundamentals of learning haven't changed, of how you learn, but the context always changes. And the technology changes, the environment changes. So within L&D, if we are not constantly trying to change, to disrupt what we are doing, then we're going to be playing a completely different game than everybody else. And I'm going to say this with peace and love, that there are many L&D practitioners that are playing, with cassettes in a TikTok world. And so I think we need to adopt this idea of there are no best practices, because that allows us to explore and search what are other people doing outside of my field, outside of my industry, and how do I implement those things to reinvent what I am doing.
I'm gonna shift the metaphor a little bit. We're gonna say a lot of people are playing Scorm in an AI world. That's a slightly deep cut for the L&D folks in the audience. And I also think right now, Shawn, you and we're playing a bit of a game of talk show chess, where I'm dropping knowledge from your book, you're dropping knowledge from mine, just volleying the ball back. Maybe it's more tennis. It's a bit of a tennis match right now. So,
well, I would disagree. In your book, by the way, you talk about the 70-20-10 rule, and which is really around, like, most of learning and development happens in the 70% on the job experience training. So that's where you're really sort of getting that ingestion of new ways of doing things. And the other thing is that you're constantly learning. And so you're constantly trying to improve and creating that mindset. And so that, to me, that's the whole idea of there are no best practices. I don't know. Maybe you disagree with that.
No, I'm with you. And I'm just going to add a note. Producer Sam, can you clip everything Shawn just said after the episode? Because that's the next ad for my book, because somehow we're now talking about my book instead of Shawn's book. So I want to veer backwards, veer back, but I agree with everything you said, Shawn. So I want to tackle something people may be thinking about when it comes to this idea of constantly be innovating, constantly looking for opportunity through disruption. And the fact that at some point, too much change can become too much change, and people might struggle to find their footing and kind of stability in the workplace. So I'm curious, what's your perspective on that kind of balancing act when, the desire to disrupt may go too far and actually create an unsteady organization?
We're always searching for stability. We hate uncertainty. As human beings, we are constantly looking for that safe blanket that we can go underneath. And, to be honest with you, if we can actually make disruption a constant and not scary and not something that we're constantly fearing, and we make disruption part of our mindset and our everyday practices, then I believe that can be the new stable. Because the punchline is that, if you remain in the status quo, if you remain in the pocket, you're going to get disrupted. So we have to be able to introduce the idea of disruption in every part of our business. And I think the best way of doing this, one of the things I talk about in the book is the idea of denting the outside. It's like, how do you start making these very small bets outside of your core? Like, you don't have to change what you are doing in the core, but how do you make these very small bets outside of what you're doing that constantly pushes you, that constantly allows you to experiment and to try new ways of doing things? To me, that's the best way of remaining stable and consistent while continuously experimenting and exploring. It's the idea of denting the outside. But I fundamentally believe that you need to include this idea of disruption every single day. It needs to be a mindset. It needs to be a practice, so that when things hit the fan or the environment changes around you, that you're able to pivot and move.
So we're having a bold conversation. The book is bold. The ideas are bold. We're talking about challenging the status quo, not asking necessarily for permission to make those dents, as you refer to. But I'm curious, big question for you. What's the difference between being bold and just being a jerk?
Oh, well, the reality is that you can be bold and be a jerk. You can be bold and not a jerk. You can be a jerk and not be bold. If you look at, for example, Steve Jobs, one of the greatest innovators of all time, many people would describe him as being bold, and many would describe him as being a jerk. One of my favorite pastimes is looking through Quora or Reddit of interactions that they've had with Steve Jobs, and I'd say the majority of people would say that he's a jerk. Now, I think when I wrote this book, The Bold Ones, one of the key elements of being bold is the ability to get people on your side, like to create momentum, to over deliver to your followers, your team members, your fans at the end of the day. So bold ones are those that shine a spotlight on others. They're able to empower others so that they come on their journey at the end of the day. And so you can be a bold one and not a jerk. It's totally possible. And you can be a bold one and a jerk. But that path is a little less effective, because who wants to go throughout their day being a jerk? So that's what I say with that. But I'd love to ask you, like, can you be bold and a jerk? I think so.
I think there's this common myth around innovators and disruptors that often carry certain personality traits or certain challenges when they're interacting with other people, because you see it with a variety of people, especially after the fact, right? When the biographies get written and you start to realize what some of those interactions and relationships were like. I would like to believe that's not a required trait when it comes to being bold and moving forward and influencing people rather than commanding people or kind of, conniving people to head in your direction, which is why, Shawn, chapter 13 in my book is about influence, because I think, again, we might come up with these bold ideas, these desires to do things differently, to approach problems from a different perspective, but we go straight at it without thinking about the fact that there's a legacy wrapped around that conversation in terms of what people think about us, the role that we play, how the way we do things here, all of those types of things. So I think we make a misstep when we don't consider influence and relationships and trust first before we then start talking about how do we bring these bold ideas to life, because then we start creating roadblocks that wouldn't be there if we focus on the human side before we focus on the kind of operational side of what we were trying to do.
So 100%, just quickly to add on that, I think that's a piece that people miss. And I think your idea of influence is really important, because, you can have the best ideas in the world, but if you can't build momentum, if you can't build a following, if you can't build social capital around your particular ideas, they're going to fall flat.
Absolutely. So Shawn, I want to get you out of here with one final question related to something that I get asked a lot when I speak. I don't know if you have this experience, but when I talk about a new mindset or mindset shift or a new bold idea for approaching workplace problems, inevitably someone raises their hand and they start their comment with the words, "I work in a highly regulated industry." And then it becomes about kind of, again, that push and pull between innovation, disruption, stability, and avoiding risk as a business. So for those people out there that may love everything you said, but have that kind of "I work in a highly regulated industry" thing hanging in the back of their minds, what would be your recommendation for kind of taking some of the ideas from the bold ones and moving forward in that kind of space?
Yeah, to be honest with you, most of my work has been within highly regulated environments, whether it's oil and gas or within the energy space, financial services, highly regulated environments. And what I would say to that is that that is an excuse. That is an excuse not to innovate. To be honest with you, you can still innovate in a highly regulated environment. It may be different than tech or media, but you can still innovate through your processes. You can still innovate how you manage your talent. You can still push the needle forward. And I think one of the biggest mistakes that we make in these environments is that we're actually not pushing the regulators as well. We're not pushing governments. We're not pushing the folks that are looking over us. And I think we need to be innovating with our regulators and working with them to push the boundaries of innovation and what we're doing within our organizations. And that means having a active dialogue with the folks that regulate us. Like, we have to innovate as much as risk management has to innovate. And so sometimes I see us sometimes we put ourselves in these invisible boxes that we're in a highly regulated environment, but we can still dent the outside. We can still take very small experiments in sandboxes and do trials and MVPs that are nonchalant, that don't rock the boat. And then we can have those conversations with our leaders and the regulators to see if we can push the needle forward. Like, there needs to be that open communication. And I've seen organizations create new ventures. They create new entities. They create new processes by working with the regulators. So I fundamentally believe that is possible.
That's a great place for us to wrap up today. Shawn, thank you again so much for joining us. Thank you for all of your insights into your book and all of your insights into my book. It was really a package deal in our conversation today. So how can people, if they want to reach out, connect with you, follow your work, grab a copy of the book, where would you want to send people?
Well, first of all, don't follow me or my work yet. Okay. Number one, the first thing you got to do is subscribe to this podcast, okay? YouTube, Spotify, whatever, okay? Subscribe to it. Very important. In the know. These guys are putting in tons of work. Check out what they're doing at Exonify. I've been working with some of the folks at Exonify and knowing them for a number of years, and some of the best, most talented people on the planet. And just a pleasure to chat with them and get JD's book. It's out everywhere. And then if you have time, you can check me out everywhere. I'm at Shawn Kanungo on all socials.
Producer Sam clipped that piece as well. Thanks again so much to Shawn Kanungo for sharing his bold perspective into the true power of disruption with us today. So if you dropped our special keyword into the LinkedIn live chat during today's show, keep an eye out for your messages in LinkedIn. We may be reaching out to you to get you a copy of The Bold Ones. And if you had a good time today, as Shawn said, be sure to subscribe to ITK. Head over to exonify.com/ITK to sign up for show announcements and reminders. You can also watch the entire collection of ITK episodes on the Exonify YouTube channel, or listen to In the Know on your favorite podcast app. And if you had fun today, things are going to get a little wacky in 2 weeks on the next episode of ITK. But instead of me telling you about it, let's have the other me fill you in.
I'm the AI version of JD, and I'll be your host for the next episode of In the Know, where we're going to break down the realities, opportunities, and risks associated with artificial intelligence in the workplace. Join me on Wednesday, March 15 at 11:30 Eastern for a very special AI-powered edition of ITK. Back to you, Real JD.
So that's the thing we're going to do. So be here in 2 weeks to meet the AI version of me as we try to sift through the hype and figure out how AI is really impacting the employee experience now and into the very near future. So until then, I've been JD. Now you're in the know. And always remember to ask yourself the important questions. Like, was the Big Bang the biggest disruption ever? I mean, it really startled everything. I'll see you next time.